The booth theater sat empty except for a single work light casting harsh shadows across the red velvet seats. November 1984. Al Pacino stood on the bare stage, script in hand, looking out at the darkened auditorium where three silhouettes sat in judgment 15 rows back. At 44, he was one of the biggest movie stars in America, but standing on this stage felt like being 19 again, auditioning for his first professional role. The theater had seen legends. Dustin Hoffman, George C. Scott, Helen Hayes, actors who'd built their reputations on these Broadway stages before Hollywood even knew their names. The walls seemed to hold the echoes of every great performance, every standing ovation, every moment when an actor transcended technique and touched something eternal. Al wore a simple black sweater and jeans, no designer clothes, no entourage, no visible signs of the movie star he'd become. He'd driven himself to the theater in a rental car, parked on the street like any struggling actor hoping for his break. This was how he wanted it, stripped down, honest, just him and the work. The play was Glengarry Glen Ross, David Mamet's brutal examination of American capitalism and moral decay. The role was Ricky Roma, a real estate salesman whose silver tongue and predatory instincts made him both fascinating and repulsive. It was the kind of character that demanded everything an actor could give: intelligence, charm, desperation, and a willingness to explore the darkest corners of human ambition. Al had been thinking about returning to theater for years. Movies had made him famous and wealthy, but theater was where he'd learned to act, where he'd discovered that performance could be more than entertainment, it could be transformation. The actor's studio had shaped him, Broadway had nurtured him, and despite his success in Hollywood, part of him still measured himself against the standard of live performance. From the darkness of the auditorium, a voice called out with theatrical authority. "Mr. Pacino, whenever you're ready." The voice belonged to Gregory Mosher, the director who'd been chosen to helm this production. Mosher was 41, a University of Chicago graduate who'd built his reputation on demanding, intellectually rigorous productions. He was known for his uncompromising vision and his belief that theater represented the purest form of dramatic art, unmediated by cameras, editors, or the commercial pressures of Hollywood. Beside Mosher sat the play's producer and a casting director, both industry veterans who'd seen hundreds of actors audition for roles that would define careers. They'd agreed to see Al as a courtesy, recognizing his box office value, but their expectations were low. Movie stars who returned to theater were usually looking for artistic credibility rather than artistic truth. "Before we begin," Mosher's voice cut through the silence, "I want to be direct about something. This production is about theatrical truth, not star power. We're not interested in Al Pacino the movie star doing Al Pacino things on stage. We're looking for an actor who can disappear completely into Ricky Roma." Al nodded from the stage, understanding the subtext. Mosher was establishing territory, making it clear that Hollywood success meant nothing in this room. This was theater, where reputation had to be earned fresh every night, where audiences could sense authenticity from the cheap seats. "I understand," Al replied, his voice carrying easily through the empty theater. "I'm here to audition for a role, not to trade on anything I've done before." Mosher leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. "Good. Because I'll be honest with you, Al. I've seen a lot of movie stars try to return to theater. Most of them have been spoiled by film acting, the multiple takes, the close-ups, the ability to build a performance in pieces. Theater demands something different." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Al felt familiar butterflies in his stomach, the same nervous energy he'd felt as a young actor auditioning for parts he desperately wanted. Success in movies hadn't eliminated that feeling, if anything, it had made it more intense. He had more to lose now. "Theater is immediate," Mosher continued, his voice taking on the tone of a professor addressing a student. "It's live, it's dangerous, it's unforgiving. You can't rely on a director to save you in editing. You can't depend on close-ups to sell emotion. You have to fill a space, connect with an audience, sustain energy for 2.5 hours without a break." Al shifted slightly on the stage, feeling the weight of the empty seats, imagining them filled with people whose attention he'd have to earn and hold through presence alone. It was a different kind of pressure than film acting, more immediate and more honest. Most movie actors, Mosher went on, have forgotten how to project genuine emotion to the back row. They've become accustomed to the intimacy of film, where a raised eyebrow can convey more than a speech. That doesn't work here. The casting director beside Mosher shuffled papers, perhaps sensing the tension building between director and star. This wasn't the usual polite audition protocol. This felt more like an interrogation, a test of Al's commitment to the craft rather than his ability to deliver lines. "I'm also concerned about commitment," Mosher said, his voice becoming more pointed. "Movie stars have obligations, press tours, meetings, other projects in development. Theater requires complete dedication. 8 shows a week, no exceptions, no substitutions. Can you make that kind of commitment?" Al felt a flash of irritation, but he kept his voice level. "I wouldn't be here if I couldn't commit completely." "Wouldn't be the first time a movie star thought they could handle theater and discovered they'd bitten off more than they could chew," Mosher replied. "Robert Redford tried it. Warren Beatty tried it. Both of them discovered that stage acting and film acting are completely different disciplines." The producer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, perhaps recognizing that Mosher was pushing harder than necessary. But Mosher seemed determined to establish that this audition would be conducted on his terms, not influenced by Al's Hollywood stature. "Here's what I need to know," Mosher said, leaning forward in his seat. "Can Al Pacino the movie star disappear completely? Can you become Ricky Roma so completely that audiences forget they're watching a famous person? Because if you can't, if any part of your performance is about Al Pacino showing off his range, then this won't work." Al looked out at the 3 silhouettes, feeling the familiar surge of energy that came when he was challenged as an actor. This wasn't just an audition anymore, it was a test of everything he believed about his craft. "You want to know if I can disappear into Ricky Roma?" Al asked, his voice gaining strength. "I want to know if you remember how to be a real actor," Mosher replied, his tone carrying unmistakable condescension. "Movie stars can't do real theater, Al. They've forgotten what it means to live truthfully in imaginary circumstances for an extended period of time." The silence that followed was electric. Al stood center stage, script in hand, feeling the weight of the challenge and the dismissive assumption underlying it. Mosher wasn't just questioning his ability, he was questioning his authenticity as an actor. When Al finally spoke, his voice carried a new quality that made all 3 men in the auditorium sit up straighter. "Would you like me to show you what real acting looks like?" But before Mosher could respond, Al was already beginning his transformation. Before Mosher could respond, Al was already beginning his transformation. The change started subtly, a shift in posture, a different quality in his breathing, the way he held his head. The Al Pacino who had walked onto the stage was disappearing, replaced by something harder, hungrier, more predatory. "You want to see real theater?" Al asked, but his voice was different now. It carried the smooth confidence of a man who made his living convincing people to trust him with their life savings. "Let me show you Ricky Roma." Al looked down at the script in his hands, then deliberately set it aside on a nearby chair. He wouldn't need it. He'd memorized not just the lines, but the psychology behind every word, every pause, every moment where Roma's mask slipped to reveal the desperate salesman underneath. "Ricky Roma doesn't audition," Al said, his voice taking on the character's particular rhythm, smooth, conversational, but with an undercurrent of calculated manipulation. "Ricky Roma sells. And right now, I'm going to sell you 3 gentlemen on why you need what I've got." The transformation was complete now. Al's entire physical presence had changed. His shoulders carried themselves differently, more aggressive, more territorial. His eyes moved like a predator's, constantly assessing, calculating advantage. Even his breathing seemed different, shallower, more controlled. Al began pacing the stage, not nervously, but with the controlled energy of a man working a room. "You think movie stars can't do real theater? Let me tell you something about real theater," about what it takes to stand on this stage 8 times a week and make people believe. His voice projected effortlessly to the back of the theater, but not in the artificial way of someone trying to fill space. This was natural projection, the kind that came from complete understanding of character and absolute confidence in the material. Real theater, Al continued, now fully inhabiting Roma's persona, is about hunger. And gentlemen, I am very, very hungry. Al stopped pacing and looked directly at Mosher, his eyes bright with Roma's predatory intelligence. You want to know what separates the real actors from the pretenders? The real actors understand that every performance is a life-or-death situation. Every night, you either kill or you die. The 3 men in the auditorium sat transfixed. This wasn't an audition anymore, this was a master class in character transformation happening in real time. See, you think I'm Al Pacino playing Ricky Roma, Al said, his voice carrying Roma's smooth arrogance. But you're wrong. Al Pacino left this building 10 minutes ago. I'm Ricky Roma, and I've been selling real estate in Chicago for 15 years, and I've never met a customer I couldn't close. Al moved closer to the edge of the stage, his eyes never leaving Mosher's face. You think movie acting is easier than stage acting? Let me tell you something about movie acting, friend. Movie acting is about finding truth in 30-second increments. Stage acting is about sustaining that same truth for 2.5 hours. Both require absolute commitment to the reality of the moment. The casting director leaned forward in her seat, completely absorbed. She'd seen hundreds of auditions, but nothing like this. Al wasn't just performing the character, he was becoming the character while simultaneously delivering a lecture on the craft of acting. But here's what movie stars forget when they come crawling back to theater, Al continued, his voice gaining intensity while remaining completely controlled. Theater audiences can smell fear from the mezzanine. They can sense when you're performing instead of living. And they will crucify you for it. Al laughed, a sound that carried Roma's confidence and cruelty. You want to test me? You want to see if I can handle the pressure of live performance? Brother, I've been handling pressure since before you knew what theater was. Al began another circuit of the stage, his movement now completely organic to the character. I started in theater. I learned to act in theater. Every movie I've ever made, every character I've ever played, started right here, on a stage, in front of people who paid money to see something real. He stopped again, this time positioning himself center stage, directly under the work light that cast his shadow across the empty seats. You think I've forgotten what it means to live truthfully in imaginary circumstances? Al asked, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the theater. Let me tell you what I know about truth. Al's voice took on a new quality, deeper, more intimate, but still projecting perfectly. Truth is what happens when you strip away everything safe and comfortable and familiar. Truth is what you find when you're standing on this stage with nowhere to hide and nothing to protect you except your commitment to the character. The producer shifted in his seat, realizing he was witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a good audition, this was a demonstration of why Al Pacino had become one of the most respected actors of his generation. Movie acting taught me precision, Al continued, his voice building again. It taught me how to find the exact moment when a character's truth becomes visible. But theater taught me endurance. Theater taught me how to sustain that truth, how to live inside another person's skin for hours at a time. Al looked directly at each of the 3 men in turn, his eyes bright with Roma's predatory intelligence but carrying something deeper, the passion of an artist defending his craft. You want to know the difference between movie stars and real actors? Al asked. Movie stars are afraid of looking foolish. Real actors are afraid of looking false. And right now, standing on this stage, I would rather fail completely than give you anything less than absolute truth. Al moved to the chair where he'd set his script, picked it up, then held it at arm's length. 12 years of movie acting, 12 years of close-ups and multiple takes and directors who think they can save everything in editing. Al let the script fall to the stage floor. And I can still fill this theater with nothing but voice and presence and absolute commitment to the reality of the moment. The silence that followed was profound. The three men in the auditorium sat motionless, absorbing what they'd just witnessed. Al stood center stage, no longer Roma, no longer the defensive movie star who'd walked in 20 minutes earlier. He was something else now, an actor who'd just reminded himself and everyone watching why he'd fallen in love with acting in the first place. Mosher was the first to break the silence, his voice considerably softer than it had been during his earlier challenge. That was extraordinary, Al. Al nodded, his breathing slightly heavy from the intensity of the performance. That was 12 minutes of what you'd get 8 times a week for however long this play runs. The casting director was furiously scribbling notes, her head shaking in apparent disbelief. The producer was smiling for the first time since Al had arrived. I owe you an apology, Mosher said, rising from his seat. I made assumptions about your commitment to theater, about your understanding of what stage acting requires. I was wrong. Al picked up his script from the floor, smoothed its pages carefully. No apology necessary. You were protecting the integrity of your production. That's what good directors do. Mosher walked closer to the stage, his earlier antagonism completely gone. What you just showed us wasn't an audition. That was a master class. That was a demonstration of why you're considered one of the finest actors of your generation. That was theater, Al replied simply. That was what happens when you commit completely to living truthfully in imaginary circumstances. Movie star or not, that's what real acting looks like. The three men conferred quietly for a moment, but their decision was obvious. When Mosher looked back at Al, he was smiling. The role is yours if you want it, Mosher said. But I have to ask, after what you just showed us, after proving your point so definitively, are you sure you want to commit to 8 shows a week? Al looked out at the empty seats, imagining them filled with audiences who would demand that same level of truth and intensity every single night. The prospect didn't frighten him, it energized him. I've been making movies for 12 years, Al said. But I've been an actor for 25 years. This is where I learned what acting really means, and this is where I want to remember why I fell in love with it in the first place. Al walked to the edge of the stage, looked directly at Mosher. 8 shows a week, no exceptions, no substitutions. Complete commitment. That's not just what I can do, that's what I need to do. 6 months later, Al Pacino's performance in Glengarry Glen Ross would win him a Tony Award. Critics would call it a triumphant return to theater, a reminder of his stage roots, a masterclass in sustained dramatic performance. But for the three men who witnessed his audition that November afternoon, the real triumph had already happened. They'd seen something rarer than a good performance or even a great one. They'd witnessed an artist rediscovering his craft, a movie star remembering what had made him an actor in the first place. The story of Al's audition spread quickly through the theater community. Directors, actors, and producers who heard about the 12 minutes that changed everything began to reconsider their own assumptions about the relationship between film and stage acting. Years later, when young actors asked Al about the difference between movie acting and theater acting, he would tell them about that afternoon at the Booth Theater. The difference isn't in the medium, he would say. The difference is in the level of commitment you're willing to make to the truth of the character. Whether it's film or stage, the audience can always tell when you're holding something back. Al Pacino had proven that movie stars could do real theater. More importantly, he'd proven to himself that success in one medium didn't diminish his hunger for the challenges of another. 12 minutes. That's all it took to remind everyone in that theater, including himself, why Al Pacino was, first and last, an actor.